Welcome back, YouTubers, to the next instalment of the Audition guitar rebuild. This morning I was using my radius sanding machine. With that I built this sanding block here. It's a nice 18-inch radius sanding block, and that's the radius I chose to sand a radius into the Audition guitar neck, which you can see on the stand there. It was difficult to decide what radius to use because the radii were different from this end to this end. I don't think it was a compound radius sanding job originally, I just think it was badly done. So it's almost flat up here and there's some radius here. So I chose 18, which seemed a bit of a compromise. It would just give a little bit of the radius without being too severe, because I didn't want to sand down too much of this, which I assume is a rosewood fretboard. So I use these gauges here just to determine what I wanted to do, and I'm going to start sanding. But before I do that, I need to clean up this end where the nut was. There's still some glue on the end of the fretboard which I need to remove. Just gently scraping it away. Okay, I'll settle for that. So I put a lolly stick along the end here, a couple of dabs of super glue just to hold it so I can take that away without too much trouble. A very thin piece of aluminium sheeting there. So before things set up too much, I removed the stick that was across the front here, and I cut along here with a Stanley knife and then just pulled out the aluminium dam that I put there. I'm going to let that set up and then I can start to sand the fretboard. So I found the best way to do this is to put my fingers onto the sanding block so that they can rub along the side of the neck, but that would also mean that this is centered, and do the same thing at the heel of the neck. So I know the front and back are centered, and then I'm just making small backwards and forwards motions, small movements. And I can see where I've been and where I'm going. We've almost got the radius here. There's quite a bit to do at the heel. There's still quite a bit back here to do. So I'm not applying too much pressure, but just a little bit on the heel of the neck here. So I've been sanding for 10 minutes or so. I decided I'd put some chalk marks on the neck just to see exactly what's happening. Well, that's interesting. I thought a lot more was going on than that. Seems to be coming off this corner, off here for some reason. It's obviously not hitting the centre. Just for a few seconds I thought I'd switch to this sanding beam. I just want to see if I get a different reading. And I've gone backwards and forwards and worked my way across. It's pretty much the same. It's not picking that up. This is still low, even with the sanding beam it's low. And there's a spot here, so it looks like these are just low spots on the fretboard. It could be wear, fretboard wear, or just, I think that it was never made very well. So that's fairly reassuring. It means that the sanding block is flat, as I'd hoped it would be. So the progress report is that this seems to have contoured nicely all the way down to here where there's a low spot. You can see, well, I can see, I don't know if you can, but it's darker here where it hasn't been sanded, and then these little marks here, but this has actually now taken a contour. So it's basically contoured, it seems to be contoured all the way along except for the low spot. So there were 3 cracks here and some gouges here. I think this was scratched with something because it looked like it had gone backwards and forwards in a sort of zigzag pattern. So the way I look at this is that if I put some of this super glue in there and then I sand it down, the gouges will be filled up. They'll probably look black. I'm pretty certain that they won't be so noticeable, and when the rosewood is given some oil, it'll shine and it will disguise any shiny sort of marks that the glue may have left. Still have this low spot here, low spot there, obviously, low spot here, but it's definitely starting to look better. I've just turned the neck around. The reason for that is I think if you flip this around from time to time, that helps, and turning the neck around helps. I think overall you get a better finished neck, more evenly sanded, largely because of the shape of this. I really can only put my hand here and on the other side. Occasionally I might do this, but I'm going to be applying pressure at different points, and because I'm standing on this side, there may be a tendency for me to pull the sanding block towards me, so I just keep turning everything fairly frequently, and that way I think I'm going to get a better finish. Using the side of the chalk like so indicates where the low spots are exactly. There's one there, still that one there. We've got a low spot down there, a little bit there. If I put this straight edge on the neck, I'll take it's a feeler gauge here, it's 2/1000ths of an inch. I can't get it under here. To about the octave, and then it sort of goes okay after that. Let's try it here. So there's a fall away here. Now, when I fretted it, I was planning to do a bit of a fall away. Usually it's on the 16th fret, sort of around here somewhere. But I think this is all right. The alternative is to keep flattening it and then contour the frets. And I think a bit of a fall away here at the upper part of the neck is not going to create a problem. I can't see how the guitar will fret out or buzz as a result of this falling away. And I think at this point I'm going to stop. I've started to show some slightly lighter wood here. Now I thought this whole thing was rosewood, but I'm starting to think that quite possibly this was mahogany with a rosewood veneer, which unfortunately has started to show. The mahogany's come through underneath. But I'm going to try to dye this a bit darker before I finish the neck. I managed to get this fairly smooth. There's a very slight dip there, but it's nothing that I'd be worried about. It feels good to the fingers. Seems to fit very well. Doesn't seem to be any problem with it. It's nice. So I can feel with this knife here that nail I drove in as a reference pin is sticking up. So I've got another one of the same size. I just ground the tip off, and I'm going to tap it in. Just check that it's below the surface now. Yep. I'll do the same at the other end. I'm getting ready to clean out the fret slots. I found this thin piece of metal. Actually, I have two of them. I should imagine it's a little bit thicker than a Coke can, but it's not very thick, enough so that I can push it into these slots. Started at the top fret, and I've cut it a little bit shorter, so this will take me down to about maybe this one here. And then I've got another one I'm preparing here. This is good for the last frets down here, on this end of the neck, and I might make a third one for the middle. But what I did is I put it in the end fret, put some masking tape over the fretboard, and then took a marker and just marked down as low as I could. And the bit that's showing there at the bottom is giving me a sense of the depth of the slot. Well, that's quite deep actually. The fret tang it barely needs half of that depth. So anything that's about halfway down would still be fine for the frets. But what I'm going to do is just to use this as a guide, work my way along, and just make sure that all the frets, like that one, is a little bit, something's going on in the middle there. I can feel it because it's rocking. There's plenty of room there for the fret. Yeah. I'm surprised that they've cut it so low. That's the way the guitar was made. I can feel the bottom of the groove, and it feels flat all the way across. I don't feel any problems. Yeah. I've got three different options here for fret wire. This is a jumbo type fret which I bought from my Stratocaster. This is a sort of medium jumbo, and this is a Japanese fret wire which they call medium. It doesn't have any other description. And then this one here is the original fret that was in the guitar, which I took out. Now the closest to that is probably this one. these frets are fairly flat, so this one's slightly taller. But this one might be a better option. I'm going to do some measurements to be sure I know what's what relative to the originals. I built this little stand, I suppose, to put the frets in. So it's just a piece of wood, looks a bit like one of those tops you'd put on a fence post. Just drilled some holes in it, probably more than I need, and I put a black marker across the top, so I'll always know which, if they were filled up, I'd always know which is number 1, and then which would be for the first fret. And then I also drilled this hole slightly off center, so there's always that to remind me. The other little jig I put together was this. It's very simple, same thing. It's one of these squares. I cut a groove across it on the table saw. That's just enough for a piece of fret wire to sit in. And then I made this little piece to go on the top with a slit down the center. And basically what happens is I can feed the fret wire in from the front, tighten it down. The fret is then held tightly, and I can file off the tang, what's left of the tang. So I've got my fret wire bender, so I'll slot it in, give it a little bit of a push to get it started, and then wind it so you can go forward and backwards. Make sure it conforms to the correct curve, and that's basically the radius I need for the neck. You can see here that unfortunately I've sanded through what turned out to be a veneered fretboard. I thought it was solid, it really looked like it was. Yes. It wasn't a thin veneer, but it wasn't enough to take the contour. You see it's gone on the edges as I've put the radius in. So that's unfortunate, but if I want the radius on the guitar neck and I want it to play well, this is unfortunately what I'm going to have to put up with. So what I've done is I've ordered some dye, some wood stain, dark wood stain, which I'm going to apply to these areas. And hopefully that should help blend it in, and then when it's fretted and I use the lemon oil, I hope that it will be disguised enough as not to be too noticeable. I'm going to use a water-based dye, so it will soak in and dry. I don't want to use anything oil-based in case it has a reaction with anything that, like the lemon oil or anything that, or any cleaner. So I think water-based is the way to go. Now I've got a little bit of chip away here where the veneer is broken. It's extremely thin there, and I'm going to dye it first and then put a little bit of super glue in there, and that should take care of that. I'm just holding the fret, sort of engaging the tang a little bit, holding the fret so it just overshoots the binding. I'm taking this tool and just leaving a millimetre, maybe a little more, and I use it this way because I've noticed that the fret can twist in the jaw of the nippers, and that's bad news because it doesn't cut it well. So I know where I'm going to cut it. So I'll straighten the tang so it's between the jaws, it's right in the centre, and then I just squeeze and I cut through, and that way I get a fairly nice square cut. The other part goes flying, of course, it always does. But what I want to bring your attention to is the end of the piece that's cut is now pointed. It comes to a taper, and that's because the back side of these nippers is that shape, and in order to cut it, it's kind of compressing this. Now ideally I should be able to carry on and just put the fret wire across and make the next cut, but unfortunately it's not possible because this is pointed and I don't want that sticking out. It's just a lot to file off, so I have to cut that away, basically using the same approach, making sure I get it nice and square. Yeah, and I'm good to go there for the next measurement. So this is the one I've just cut. It's going there. I'm just checking to see that it's the right length. It's just a little bit shooting over on either side. So at that point I take the nippers and I don't have to take off much, it's just enough for the binding to clear. Put the nippers in like this and I try to cut through. There's no resounding sort of snapping sound or anything. And then I go 90 degrees, and you have to be really careful that you get the fret to sit on top of the nippers. I've done it once or twice where I've actually been biting into the crown of the fret, so we don't want that. And sometimes a little wiggle is all it needs to break it off. I've still got a little bit of fret tang showing, sticking up a little bit, not very much. I'll do the same on the other side. Make sure it's fully seated. Cutting it once, making sure it's fully seated, cutting it twice. And by backing off the screws a little bit I can feed this in. Just leave it sticking out a tad to tighten it down. I'll take my little file. There we go. Now it's possible to actually get to that one from this position, but I'm just going to switch it round. It's easier for the camera. There we go. That's perfect now. I hope you can see that, but that's nice and filed and flat. I've got one more here to cut. So I'm trimming the end. I'm overshooting the binding just a little bit. Allowing just a tiny bit of overhang on this side, centering the tang. Yep, looks good. Sometimes it requires a little bit of a wobble. I've adjusted this so I can push it in from the front now. Don't have to mess about with the screws. Perfect. So that's all 21 frets cut, tanged, or detanged I should say, and they're ready to go in. So I'm now putting these frets on. They're going down pretty good. They're flattening in alright. The way I'm doing it is I'm putting glue on the tang itself and then hammering it into place. I'm using this Stumac hammer. This side of the hammer is a brass hammer. It has some shot in it apparently, so it acts as a dead blow hammer. I'm not completely convinced that you need all these fancy tools. I'm sure any kind of hammer could put a bit of felt on the tip if you're concerned about it marking, but even this soft, I think it's brass, soft brass face of the hammer is actually slightly scratching the frets. I'm sure that will all come out in the fret polishing, but I did happen to notice it. So I don't want to flood too much glue into this. It runs down the tang pretty quick, so I turn the tang over as fast as I can. Try to engage the tang in the slot with a little bit of overhang closest to me. Tap that end in. Tap that end in. Let's come back out, which is the first time that's happened. That's better. And then I just work my way across. And that's pretty flat. I can see it seems to be touching the fretboard all the way across. I'm pleased with that. I did notice a tiny little bit of glue squeeze out on this side. Some of them did it and some didn't. I'm not that fussed. I'm going to let that dry and see if I can scrape it off. There is obviously a tendency to want to wipe it off, and I found when you do that it does, I did it once here, it does spread out, so it's better to leave it there and just scrape it off, I think. So same thing, a little bit of glue. Kind of wait till the glue comes to the tip. You can see it kind of bulging on the end. And just run it along, let it wick out. See, there's a little bit extra there at the end. So I'm lining it up, the fret's gone in. I can feel a little bit extra here, a little bit extra on the other side. The skin stuck to the fretboard. Now I just put my head sideways and check, and it's flat. Now the other thing I did, I was just curious to see how well these are going in terms of being level. So I got my fret rocker, and I noticed that this second fret is slightly high in the center, so I knocked it down with the hammer. It made no difference. So I really don't know if that's the sanding, although I doubt it, and it's perfectly flat on the side here. These are fine. So that one's slightly high in the centre too. This one is slightly high on that side. So even though I sanded the fretboard to a condition that I thought was really good, that's better. There's a few high frets. Now I assume this is probably normal, and it's not a great deal, and it can be taken care of when it's levelled. Positioning is good. It's down good and solid. I don't know whether you can see there's a little bit of a splash of glue here. Now I see some people wax the fretboard. I haven't bothered with this. I'm a little concerned that that may interfere with the oil that I'm going to use. So I'd prefer to just let it do what it does, and then I'll get a razor blade and I'll just gently scrape the top of this where the glue is. I think that will be fine. So the fret job's done. The other thing is I need to get a dead fret or a 0 fret to go here. I've got some ideas for that. So on the whole, I think it went pretty well for my first time. I would suggest that it's not as difficult as you think. The frets are fairly pliable, which is good. They scratch quite easily as well. Even this brass face of the hammer I can see has left a few little nicks here and there. The gluing wasn't the easiest thing. I think I probably would have preferred it if I'd had a thinner tip on the bottle and I could have just wicked it straight into the slot, but I didn't have that option, so I put it on the tang. When this was being sanded, the twist was being taken out of the neck. It did widen the neck very fractionally at this point, which I don't think is a problem, but it also lengthened the amount of wood that was flattened here beyond where the nut would sit when it's replaced. So if I put the nut back, it comes to there, the edge of that blue tape, and I put another piece of tape here which is right at the edge of the black gloss of the headstock. So I have a little bit of exposed wood here which I need to take care of, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paint by hand some black gloss, just a little bit. I'm going to push that in, paint that on there. I've got a product I've used on my house here which levels quite nicely, so I'm thinking that will probably do the job. That's the tiniest amount of primer.